The big business of farming in America is booming. But if you look a little closer, it's feeding on millions of vulnerable lives to do it. More than half of all the farm workers in the United States are undocumented migrants, and that means they're ripe for exploitation. They face low wages, substandard housing, injuries, pesticides, heat stroke. Some literally work themselves to death. So why do migrant workers choose such a brutal path? Well, the standard explanation is that they're seeking a better life here. But for many, there's really no choice involved. Free trade deals and agricultural subsidies cooked up in Washington have forced millions of Latin American farmers off their lands, unable to compete with the heavily subsidized food pouring in from the United States. South of the border, entire farming towns have emptied out, and for many migrant workers here, there is now nothing to go home to. On this week's Inside Focus, we follow the trail of farming in the era of free trade, from Mexico to California to North Carolina. Here's Seb Walker with the story.
In California's San Joaquin Valley, a group of farm laborers keeps America's food production moving. They may be the backbone of US agriculture, but their presence here is, under US law, illegal. Most of these workers are undocumented, and they could be arrested and deported at any moment. In California alone, there are 500,000 overwhelmingly Latin American migrant farm workers. They are on the bottom rung of a multi-billion-dollar industry. The United States is the largest producer of food in the world. Much of that production is controlled by corporate giants, and the name of the game is profit. And maximizing those profits requires cheap labor.
Give us a fair day's wage, treat us with respect and dignity.
Antonio Rodriguez has dedicated his life to improving conditions for the largely undocumented workforce on which American agribusiness relies. But it's an uphill struggle.
Oftentimes, growers and farm labor contractors think that, well, you know, who are they? They're not as important as legal citizens. They don't have any standing in society, legal standing in society, so we're going to abuse them, we're going to mistreat them, we're going to exploit them.
For these workers, the pace is relentless. Any breaks mean money lost. They're all paid by the hour. It's back-breaking work, and in temperatures of well over 40 degrees Celsius, it can also be deadly.
It's incredible that growers and farm labor contractors continue to have their workers trying to work at the same pace they always do, and are not providing them with the basics. We're suffering right now a major epidemic of farm workers dying because of heat stroke there in the fields.
In the last 3 months alone, 5 immigrant farm workers have died in California's fields. In the town of Santa Maria, near Los Angeles, the relatives of one victim gather to bury his ashes. Jose Hernandez collapsed and died as he was harvesting vegetables in soaring temperatures. The authorities have vowed to crack down, but they haven't exactly made it a priority. The state of California employs just 62 inspectors to monitor its farms in an area the size of Iraq. The accepted wisdom in the US is that these workers have come across the Mexican border looking for a better life. With cash in hand and no questions asked, it might seem like a good deal.
100. Yeah, 100 for me.
But the reality is much more complicated, and one that is deeply rooted in policies forged in Washington. For an answer as to why the US has seen such a massive influx of migrant workers, we traveled across the border to the state of Chihuahua in northern Mexico. This is where many of the men and women working in America's fields come from. Here, Mexican farmers have, over the last 2 decades, been pitched into the global marketplace.
Look at the agricultural tools here, instruments or equipment, the machines. They are completely abandoned.
Victor Quintana is a local politician who's been struggling to deal with the phenomenon. He says ghost towns like this one can be found across the state.
You have your beans or your corn competing with the Iowa corn or the Michigan or Colorado beans, highly subsidized, highly tinified.
Free trade deals and the lowering of import tariffs means that horse and plough must now compete against huge US farms with all their technology and subsidies worth billions of dollars. Mexico's small farmers here now plant their seeds in what's become a completely uneven playing field. It has also resulted in a dramatic toll on the local community. In the space of just a decade, entire farming communities have simply collapsed. Many of them have moved north across the border in search of work.
They started to migrate the husband, then the whole family, and then they abandoned the house, they abandoned the machines, because or they don't want to invest money in that.
This is what used to be the main street of a once thriving farming town. Chiriguilla was in fact a focal point of activity for the region's farming community. There were rodeos held here and fiestas at harvest time. The town was home to more than 50 families. Now, only a handful still remain. Quintana says while subsistence farming was already under pressure, free trade agreements signed with the US were the final straw.
The countryside has been weakened by the structural policies. And when NAFTA arrived, the countryside, the farmers, were not in condition to compete because they had been weakened before.
Along with Canada and the US, Mexico was one of 3 original signatories to the North American Free Trade Agreement back in 1994. The deal's been enforced in Mexico by a succession of Washington-friendly governments, happy to rely on cheaper US imports for their country's food supply. But when the price of those imports goes up, the result can be devastating. Tens of thousands took to Mexico's streets last year to protest a 400% rise in the cost of tortillas, the country's basic staple. With grain now hitting record levels as a commodity in the global marketplace, US farming giants like Cargill and ADM, the 2 largest grain producers on the planet, are cleaning up. Last year alone, they raked in profits of nearly $5 billion between them. Even so, the US Congress just months ago approved a $300 billion farm bill, giving US agribusiness billions of dollars in direct payments every year to help undercut the markets.